It all started on a regular Thursday afternoon, or at least it seemed that way. I had just finished my lunch and was sitting in my office, scrolling through some emails when I received a message from my friend Josh. We've known each other since college, and if there's one thing I can say about Josh, it's that he's always been a bit of a character, someone who likes to push boundaries. And like usual, he was inviting me to join him for some spontaneous fun. His messages are typically harmless, just throwing out some ridiculous idea, but this time, well, let me take you through it. Josh had been recently getting into urban exploration, the kind of thing where you sneak into abandoned buildings, old factories, and other derelict places that are just begging for a ghost hunting crew to show up. I used to go along with his crazy antics, mostly to get out of the house and see the weird places he would discover, but the older I got, the less interested I became. So, I had started dodging his invitations. This time, though, I was feeling a little adventurous. Plus, I was curious to see what he was up to. The plan was simple: meet up after work, drive out to some remote location, and explore an abandoned hospital just outside the city limits. I wasn't thrilled about it, but I figured a couple of hours of walking around wouldn't hurt. Besides, Josh promised we'd be back before it got too late. We agreed to meet up at 6:30 p.m. I wrapped up my work for the day, grabbed a jacket, and headed out. When I pulled into the parking lot where Josh was waiting, he was already standing by his car, looking more excited than I thought was humanly possible for a guy who'd spent his entire day working from home. "Ready for an adventure?" he asked with a huge grin. I was skeptical, but I agreed. The drive out to the hospital was uneventful, save for some strange conversation about conspiracy theories and random urban legends that Josh had been reading up on. As we neared our destination, we turned off the main road onto a smaller dirt path that wound around the outskirts of the hospital grounds. The place was more isolated than I remembered. All the windows were boarded up, and there was an eerie silence in the air. Now, I know what you're probably thinking: why the hell did you go into an abandoned hospital? And honestly, in hindsight, I have no good answer for you. It seemed like a good idea at the time, and Josh was practically bouncing in excitement, so I didn't want to seem like a wimp. What could possibly go wrong? We parked and grabbed our gear. Flashlights, a couple of cameras, just in case we saw something cool, and some snacks, because, you know, urban exploration is also about not starving to death in some creepy building. The outside of the hospital looked like something straight out of a horror movie. The bricks were covered in ivy, and the front doors were chained shut with rusted metal. However, Josh, being Josh, had already found an unsecured window around the back. Of course, this is where I should have said, "No way, man. This is too sketchy." But instead, I followed him, because what's a friend for, right? We climbed through the window, and immediately, a cold draft hit us. The place smelled musty and stale, and the floors creaked under our weight. The building was enormous, but it was mostly abandoned except for a few stray animals and, well, the occasional group of people like us. We started walking through the hallways, exploring the rooms, finding old medical equipment covered in dust, and laughing at how creepy everything looked. Honestly, it was a little fun at first. That is, until we stumbled into what I can only describe as the restricted area. Josh had gotten a little too adventurous and found a stairwell leading down to the basement. The door was locked, but not securely. He managed to jimmy it open with a small crowbar he had brought for just this kind of situation. "Come on, man. Let's check it out," he urged. I hesitated. Something about the basement felt off. It wasn't just the darkness or the dampness, it was the feeling that something was down there with us. But Josh was already heading down the stairs, and being the idiot I am, I followed. The basement was unlike any part of the hospital we'd seen so far. It was cold, like the air had been trapped there for decades, and the walls were covered in black mold. The floor was littered with old broken furniture and discarded medical files. At first, we didn't notice anything too unusual. But then, I saw it. At the far end of the basement, there was a door, partially ajar, with a dim light flickering from inside. Josh, of course, was already making his way toward it, and I was behind him, barely keeping up. As we got closer, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. I should have said something, but I didn't. Josh reached out and pushed the door open. What we saw on the other side was disturbing. The room looked like it had been set up for some kind of experiment. There were tables with old, rusty surgical tools, wires, and strange machines I couldn't even begin to understand. But the worst part? There was a large metal cabinet in the corner of the room. It was locked, but the door was slightly ajar, and through the crack, we could see something inside. I'm not going to lie, the curiosity got the better of us. Josh opened the cabinet, and that's when everything went south. Inside, there were old medical supplies and what appeared to be vials of some strange liquid, but that wasn't what caught my attention. What caught my attention was the large, sealed envelope on the shelf in the back of the cabinet. It looked out of place, too clean compared to everything else. Josh grabbed it, and without thinking, we opened it. Inside the envelope was a set of old photographs, disturbing photographs. They were black and white, taken years ago, depicting patients in various stages of surgery. But what stood out were the notes written on the back of the photos, detailing unethical experiments being performed on the patients. The more we read, the more my stomach turned. Suddenly, we heard a sound. A door creaked open upstairs, and it was followed by footsteps. I felt my heart race. Josh, too, looked alarmed. Someone else was in the hospital. We needed to leave, fast. We grabbed the envelope and bolted for the window we had entered through. As we climbed back out, I could hear the footsteps getting closer, and I felt like we were being watched. I'm not ashamed to admit that we practically ran back to the car, and I didn't even bother to look behind me. We made it back to the car in one piece, but neither of us said much during the drive home. The adrenaline was wearing off, and the reality of what we had seen set in. I haven't spoken to Josh since that night. I've tried to convince myself it was just an abandoned hospital, nothing more than an old building with some creepy history. But deep down, I know there was something off about that place, something that still gives me the chills when I think about it. Moral of the story? If your friend invites you to explore an abandoned hospital, and you get that gut feeling it's a terrible idea, listen to it. Trust me, some things are better left untouched. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I should probably start by mentioning that I'm not exactly the most organized person. I tend to forget things, misplace stuff, and occasionally leave a trail of chaos in my wake. This particular incident started innocently enough, but it quickly spiraled into something I never could have predicted. It was supposed to be a typical weekend, run a few errands, maybe catch up on some laundry, and watch a movie with my girlfriend later that evening. You know, nothing special. But somehow, it turned into the most embarrassing and awkward day of my life. It all began on a Saturday morning when I realized I had completely forgotten to buy a birthday gift for my best friend, Kyle. His birthday was the next day, and I had completely spaced on it. I'm the kind of guy who sets reminders for everything, but somehow, I missed this one. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks, especially since I was supposed to hang out with him at his party tomorrow. Not only had I forgotten the gift, but I also didn't want to show up empty-handed. So, I made a quick plan to buy him something decent, hoping it wouldn't look like I had thrown it together at the last minute. My girlfriend, Emily, and I were supposed to meet up later in the day, so I decided to kill two birds with one stone. I could get Kyle's gift and grab a few things I needed for the week while I was at the mall. It was about 11:30 a.m., and I had just finished my morning coffee, so I figured I'd have enough time to shop, pick up some groceries, and still get to Emily's place before 3 p.m. The mall was relatively busy when I arrived. It was a Saturday, after all, and I wasn't the only one who had left their shopping to the last minute. I started by heading straight to the department store to grab a gift for Kyle. I'm not the most thoughtful gift giver, and I have no idea what Kyle might like at the moment. So, I found myself wandering through the aisles, looking at everything from cologne to random gadgets, all while stressing about time. About 30 minutes into my search, I spotted a watch that looked like something Kyle would wear. It wasn't too flashy but had a sleek design. I grabbed it without giving it much thought. After all, it was a gift, and it seemed safe enough. With that out of the way, I headed to the next part of my plan, groceries. I had a mental list of things I needed, some fruit, eggs, snacks for the week, and I figured I could grab everything in one go. I made my way to the grocery section of the mall. Now, this is where things took a turn for the worse. As I was scanning the shelves for some cereal, I realized I had forgotten to charge my phone. It had about 5% battery left, which, in my world, is basically a ticking time bomb. I use my phone for everything: directions, reminders, grocery lists, and the occasional emergency Google search. So, I knew I needed to find an outlet and get some charge before I completely lost my lifeline. I spotted a charging station near the food court and rushed over to plug in my phone. It was a small kiosk, surrounded by a few chairs, where people could sit and charge their phones. I sat down, plugging my phone into one of the open spots, and immediately felt my shoulders relax. With the phone charging, I decided to take a moment to relax and scroll through social media. It's amazing how much time you can waste mindlessly scrolling through TikTok when you have nothing else to do. After about 10 minutes of scrolling, I felt the need to grab something to eat. Emily had texted me earlier to let me know she'd be free around 3 p.m., so I had a little more time to kill. I made my way to the food court and grabbed a quick burger and fries. I was still feeling the pressure to finish my shopping, but I figured I could get it all done in the next hour. Here's where it all really started to fall apart. As I was sitting at a table eating my lunch, I noticed something strange. A guy at the table next to me had been staring at me for a few minutes. Not in a casual way either. It was more of a focused, intense stare that made me uncomfortable. He wasn't doing anything out of the ordinary, just sitting there eating his food, but his eyes kept darting to my watch and then to my face. I decided to ignore it, thinking he might just be zoning out or lost in thought. But the more I tried to focus on my meal, the more I felt like I was being watched. It was only when I finished my burger and stood up to throw away my tray that the guy finally spoke. "Hey, that's a nice watch you got there. Is that a limited edition?" I blinked, surprised by the sudden comment. I had no idea what he was talking about. I had bought the watch just 30 minutes ago, and it was nothing special, just a simple, black leather band with a silver face. Thanks," I said, feeling awkward. "I just bought it today. Nothing too fancy." The guy smirked, his eyes lighting up with recognition. "Yeah, it's definitely a limited edition. Those things are selling for a lot more than what you paid for it, man." I was confused. "What do you mean?" "I got it from the department store. It was on sale." The guy chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Nah, I don't think so. You might want to check the label on that thing. It's got the wrong brand on it. It's a knockoff." I felt my stomach drop. I stared at him, unsure of how to respond. I knew he could be mistaken, but his tone was so confident that I started to doubt myself. The thought crossed my mind that maybe I had been duped by some knockoff watch. My mind raced as I thought back to the moment I picked it up. I didn't even check the label or price tag thoroughly. I was so rushed, so focused on getting it done. I muttered some excuse and hurried away from the food court, my anxiety growing with every step. I immediately checked the watch as soon as I could. Sure enough, the logo on the face didn't match the brand I had thought it was. It was a cheap knockoff of a luxury brand that had a similar design but was nowhere near the same quality. I felt like a complete idiot. I quickly went back to the department store, hoping to exchange it. When I explained the situation to the employee, they just looked at me like I was crazy. "This is a clearance item," she told me, "and there's no exchange policy on clearance goods. You can't return it." I was stuck with a $150 knockoff watch that wasn't even worth half of that. It was a total disaster. Not only had I completely misjudged the quality of the gift I bought for my best friend, but now I had to figure out how to avoid embarrassing myself further when I gave it to him the next day. The moral of the story? Always, and I mean always, double-check what you're buying, especially when you're in a rush and under pressure. That watch ended up being one of the most embarrassing gifts I've ever given. I couldn't even bring myself to give it to Kyle, and I ended up just giving him a gift card with a sincere apology. That was, hands down, the worst shopping experience of my life. TIFU by trying to impress my friends with my amazing cooking skills. So, this all started about a month ago when I decided to host a dinner party for a few of my closest friends. I'm not a chef by any means, but I like to think that I can hold my own in the kitchen. I've watched enough cooking shows and YouTube tutorials to know the basics. I also really wanted to impress everyone with my skills, you know? Show them that I'm not just a guy who lives on takeout and frozen pizzas. The plan was to make a fancy 3-course meal, and I had everything figured out. Appetizers, a beautiful main course, and a decadent dessert. Everything was going smoothly in my head, but we all know how those plans can sometimes go off the rails. I spent the entire day prepping for the party. I wanted everything to be perfect. First, I decided on the appetizer, smoked salmon on toasted crostini with a dill cream cheese spread. Simple, right? I could do that. I carefully arranged everything, making sure each crostini was topped just so. I was feeling pretty confident. The salmon looked fresh, the bread was crispy, and the cream cheese spread was light and fluffy. Perfect start. Next, I moved on to the main course. I had chosen a beef Wellington. Yeah, I know. Beef Wellington. Not exactly the easiest thing to make, but I thought it would be a showstopper. I figured if I could pull this off, my friends would be talking about this dinner for weeks. I mean, Gordon Ramsay makes it look easy, so how hard could it be? I went to the store and bought a beautiful piece of beef tenderloin, some mushrooms, prosciutto, puff pastry, and a few other ingredients that I thought I would need. The recipe I was following had detailed instructions, so I felt pretty confident. I seared the beef to perfection, spread the mushroom duxelle over it, wrapped it in prosciutto, and then in puff pastry. Everything looked good. But, of course, it was taking way longer than I thought it would. I was already running behind schedule. I was trying to stay calm, but I could feel the sweat beginning to form on my forehead. The clock was ticking, and I still had a lot to do. The Wellington had to go in the oven for a while, so I moved on to the dessert, a chocolate soufflé. I figured I'd make the soufflé last, since it had to be served immediately after coming out of the oven. I had all the ingredients ready, and the instructions seemed pretty straightforward. Whisk the eggs, melt the chocolate, fold it all together. Easy. While I was working on the soufflé, I heard a sudden beep from the kitchen. The oven. I had completely forgotten about the Wellington. I rushed over, opened the oven door, and, well, let's just say it didn't look quite like I thought it would. The pastry was golden, but the beef was, well, it was more of a medium well than rare. My heart sank. It was supposed to be perfectly pink in the middle. I had overcooked it. Not only that, but the pastry had puffed up in some odd way, creating a big bulge on one side that made it look like a lopsided, overstuffed pastry bomb. Okay, I told myself. No big deal. I could still salvage it. I figured I'd just slice it and present the inside as if I meant for it to be medium well. No one would know, right? So, I cut into the Wellington, and disaster. It was a soggy, gloppy mess. The beef was tough, the mushrooms had leaked moisture everywhere, and the pastry was basically a sad, soggy pillow. I had no choice but to try and salvage the beef by slicing it thinner and serving it with a few sides. By this point, I could already feel the anxiety creeping in. I had planned to make a beautiful presentation, but that was clearly out the window. I quickly tossed the pieces onto plates, adding a few garnishings to distract from the sad reality of what I had done. The crostinis were good though, so I hoped that maybe that would buy me some goodwill. Dinner time was rapidly approaching, and I still hadn't even gotten to the soufflés. I figured the soufflés would be my saving grace. I mixed everything together, poured the batter into the ramekins, and set them in the oven. The recipe said they'd be ready in about 15 minutes, but as I was setting the table, I heard a strange pop from the kitchen. I rushed over, opened the oven, and saw the unthinkable. The soufflés had collapsed. Completely flat. Instead of rising up in all their fluffy, delicate glory, they had just fallen. Like deflated balloons. They looked like sad little puddles of chocolate at the bottom of the ramekins. I could feel my face go hot with embarrassment. I had ruined everything. My friends were about to arrive, and I had nothing to serve them. I looked at the clock. They would be here in 10 minutes. I was out of options. At this point, I did what any desperate person would do. I called up my best friend, Sarah, and told her what had happened. She immediately told me not to worry and that she could help. I told her there was nothing she could do, it was too late. But she insisted, saying that she was just around the corner and could bring over some of her mom's famous lasagna. It was a lifesaver. My friends arrived, and I put on the best face I could. I greeted them with a forced smile and tried to act like everything was fine, but they immediately noticed the lack of anything remotely resembling what I had promised. I quickly admitted that the Wellington was a disaster and that the soufflés were more like souffles. They laughed, and I was relieved that they didn't seem too disappointed. Then Sarah showed up, carrying the lasagna. The room was filled with the delicious smell of homemade Italian food, and everyone was instantly excited. We ate, we laughed, and no one seemed to mind that my fancy dinner party had turned into a lasagna rescue mission. In the end, it was a memorable night, and everyone had a great time. But I learned a valuable lesson: never try to make beef Wellington when you're under pressure, and always have a backup plan. Also, maybe stick to making things like pasta or pizza, which are a lot harder to screw up. Now, every time my friends and I get together, they joke about my famous beef Wellington. It's kind of a running gag. At least I'm the punchline of a good story, I guess. But next time, I'll leave the fancy cooking to the professionals. TLDR, tried to impress my friends with a fancy dinner party. Beef Wellington was a disaster, soufflés collapsed, and I had to rely on my friend's lasagna to save the night. This happened a few months ago, and I'm still traumatized by it. I can't even look at my own reflection without feeling embarrassed. It all started with me trying to impress a girl I liked, and it went horribly wrong. So, a little background: I'm not exactly a social butterfly. I'm the type of guy who spends more time reading books and playing video games than going out and meeting new people. But I had recently joined a new gym, mostly because I wanted to get in shape and also because I thought it would be a good way to meet some people. The gym wasn't a huge one, just a small, somewhat local spot, but it was the kind of place where everyone knew each other. And, of course, there was one girl in particular who caught my eye. Her name was Emily. She was a regular at the gym, always there at the same time as me. She was friendly, fit, and, this is important, she had a smile that could light up a room. I had never really talked to her before, but I had seen her around long enough to know that she was a solid gym-goer, always crushing her workouts. She would usually do her own thing on the treadmill or in the free weights area, and I would just quietly go about my own routine. But one day, I found myself really drawn to her and wanted to get her attention. Now, here's where I messed up. I had read somewhere that people who lift weights are generally pretty fond of talking about their lifts and offering unsolicited advice to others. I figured this was my in. I didn't know much about lifting, but I had a solid enough understanding to fake it, at least, I thought I did. So, one fateful afternoon, I walked into the gym with the intention of being a total gym bro. I saw Emily on the leg press machine, working her legs like an absolute beast. I thought to myself, alright, this is it. Time to impress her. I walked over to her with all the confidence I could muster, trying to look like I belonged, even though I was secretly terrified. "Hey, Emily," I said casually, trying to sound smooth. "I couldn't help but notice you're doing the leg press. You know, you're supposed to keep your knees at about a 90-degree angle to avoid injuring your joints." She paused, looked up at me, and gave me a smile, which made my heart race. "Oh, really? I didn't know that." "Thanks for the tip," she replied, genuinely friendly. I thought I was doing great. But then, in my infinite wisdom, I decided to take it a step further. I walked over to the machine next to hers, which happened to be a squat rack, and loaded up the bar with way more weight than I was used to. I was determined to show her I knew what I was doing. I was going to squat like a pro. Now, let me tell you, I had only ever squatted with minimal weight before. And I wasn't exactly doing it with perfect form. But today, I was going to be a champion. I was going to lift so much weight that Emily would be blown away. I loaded the bar with 225 pounds, way more than I could handle, and I positioned myself under it. The first problem was that I didn't have a spotter, but I was too proud to ask anyone for help. The second problem was that I didn't realize how off my form was until it was too late. I tried to squat down, and immediately felt the weight pushing me further down than I was comfortable with. But, hey, I thought, this is fine. I've got this. I managed to get down halfway before I realized I had made a huge mistake. My legs were shaking, and the weight felt like it was going to crush me. I could barely push back up. I was stuck at the bottom of the squat, unable to lift the bar, my legs trembling, and my pride shattering in front of me. Emily, who had clearly noticed my struggle, stood up and started walking toward me. I could see her out of the corner of my eye, and I was too embarrassed to even look at her. My body was screaming for help, but I didn't want to look weak in front of her. "Do you need some help?" Emily asked, her voice kind and genuine. At this point, I knew I had to admit defeat, but my pride was still holding me hostage. Instead of asking for help, I tried to wriggle out from under the bar, thinking I could somehow slide it off my shoulders and save face. That was a terrible decision. As I attempted to slide the bar off, my legs buckled, and I fell backward, crashing straight into the leg press machine Emily had been using earlier. The noise was deafening, metal clanging, weights shifting, and me groaning in the process. The barbell was now awkwardly resting on my chest, and I was completely pinned. I was in a full-on panic mode, unable to move, and all I could think was, I'm going to die here and Emily will never look at me the same way again. But Emily didn't leave. She rushed over to me, pushing the bar off of me and helping me sit up. "Oh my God, are you okay?" That looked terrifying. I was beyond embarrassed, my face bright red and my body in shock. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just a little stuck there." She helped me up and checked me for injuries. Honestly, I had only a couple of bruises and a sore back, but I felt like I had just endured the most humiliating moment of my life. Emily, bless her heart, didn't make fun of me. She just kept assuring me that I was fine and that it wasn't a big deal. She even gave me a little laugh, which somehow made the whole situation even worse. "Well, maybe next time, start with a little less weight," she said with a grin. I couldn't even respond. I was too busy wishing I could just vanish into thin air. After that, I pretty much never went back to that gym. I couldn't handle the thought of seeing her again and reliving that moment. I signed up for a different gym, one a bit further from home, where no one knew me or my failed attempt at impressing anyone. Looking back, I realize how utterly stupid I was to think that faking knowledge about something I had no clue about was a good strategy. If I had just been honest with her and maybe asked for advice or just tried to be myself, things might have gone a lot better. But instead, I went for the macho, fake it till you make it approach, and it completely backfired. So yeah, I still cringe every time I think about it. Every time I see someone squatting in the gym, I can't help but wonder if they've ever had a moment as embarrassing as mine. TLDR, tried to impress a girl at the gym by pretending I knew how to squat, loaded way too much weight, got stuck under the barbell, and had to be rescued by her. TIFU by accidentally sending my mom a picture of my junk instead of my girlfriend's. So, this happened last weekend, and I'm still recovering from the emotional and social trauma. I'm not proud of what went down, but I think it's one of those moments that's so stupid that it's funny. Or at least, I hope it'll be funny when I tell the story, if I can even look anyone in the eye again. Here's how it all started. I've been dating my girlfriend, Sarah, for about 6 months now, and we're in that phase where things are going great, but we're still learning a lot about each other. We've got our inside jokes, our shared playlists, and yeah, a bit of a sexual connection. Like, we text each other some pretty personal stuff throughout the day, including pictures sometimes, but nothing too crazy. Mostly playful stuff like selfies and the occasional, "what's up," pics. The usual. Now, my mom is a tech-savvy person. She's not one of those older folks who gets lost in the digital world. In fact, she probably knows more about smartphones than I do, which is both comforting and terrifying at times. Anyway, she's a little too into texting me all the time, usually to ask if I've eaten or to update me on some random family news. It's sweet, but also, well, not always necessary. So, last Saturday morning, I was texting Sarah some spicy pictures, the mild variety, nothing too wild, don't need to make this more awkward than it already is. We were joking about how we should send each other pics of something we'd never expect. She sent me a pic of her shoes, and I thought it was hilarious, so I decided to send her something back. In my head, I figured I'd do something playful, just a quick snap, no big deal. I took the photo, sent it, and went back to scrolling through Twitter or something. I didn't think much of it. But here's where the nightmare started. Now, for context, I have my mom's contact saved under Mom and Sarah under her name, obviously. However, here's the issue, my phone screen was locked, and I was holding it at an awkward angle as I put it back down on the couch. The phone slid off my lap and onto the floor, and when I went to pick it up, I didn't notice that it had opened the conversation with my mom, not Sarah. Without realizing it, I tapped my mom's name and proceeded to hit the send button without thinking twice. Boom. The picture of my junk is now on its way to my mom. At first, I didn't even register what had happened. I was on autopilot, still distracted by whatever I was doing. It wasn't until a few seconds later when my phone buzzed with a text notification from my mom. I glanced at the screen and saw the preview of the message, "What on earth is this, honey?" I froze. My stomach dropped. At first, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe I had sent a funny meme to the wrong chat, right? Yeah. No. I opened the conversation, and I saw it. My mom had received the picture. I immediately went into full panic mode, trying to think of a way to fix this. My heart was racing. My hands were shaking. I had no idea what to do. Should I text her back? Should I just pretend like nothing happened? But I knew that was impossible. This was the sort of mistake that can't be fixed with an awkward joke or a simple sorry. I quickly opened the message and typed the first thing that came to mind, which, in hindsight, was a terrible response. "OMG MOM, I did not mean to send that to you. Not good. Not good at all." She responded almost immediately, "Then who were you sending it to?" I was sweating now. I was trying to think of something clever to say, but nothing was coming to me. I couldn't think of a single thing that wouldn't make this worse. I had two options, admit what happened and apologize, or lie my way out of it and probably make it even worse. I decided to try to explain. It was meant for Sarah. I accidentally sent it to you instead. The thing is, my mom is a huge overthinker, and she doesn't exactly handle surprises well. She was typing back for a while, and I could see the bubbles popping up on my screen, but then they would stop and start again, which was honestly making things worse. I had no idea what she was thinking or even if she was typing or Googling what to do if your son accidentally sends you a naked photo. Finally, she texted back, "You should be more careful with who you send photos to. This is not appropriate, and I'm really disappointed. I don't want to have this conversation anymore." I was crushed. Absolutely crushed. But I couldn't blame her. I mean, what was I supposed to expect? She's my mom. It wasn't just some awkward situation where you explain it to a friend or someone your own age. This was my mom. And I had just sent her a picture of my, well, you know. At that point, I didn't know what else to say. I just typed, "Sorry, I love you," and put my phone face down, hoping it would magically go away. The thing is, it didn't. Because a few minutes later, Sarah texted me, "Did you seriously send me a picture of your junk, or was that a mistake?" I thought about pretending it was a joke, but then I remembered that I literally just sent the same picture to my mom. So, instead of trying to play it off, I just apologized to Sarah too, explaining what had happened. She was super understanding about it, thankfully, and she even offered to send me a funny meme to lighten the mood. But the emotional damage had already been done. To make matters worse, I had a family gathering the next day, and my mom was still giving me the cold shoulder. Every time I tried to talk to her, she'd give me this look like, "You know what you did." I had to endure a whole day of small talk and awkward silences, all because of a stupid mistake. Since then, things have been a bit strained. Mom is still clearly upset, and I'm just waiting for the inevitable conversation we're going to have about boundaries and appropriate behavior. I know it's coming, and it's going to be uncomfortable as hell. So yeah, that's my TIFU. I accidentally sent my mom a picture of my junk, and now my life is permanently a little bit more awkward. If you're ever in doubt, maybe just don't send pictures of yourself to anyone. Or at least double-check who you're sending them to. Trust me, it's not worth the risk. So, a little backstory: I, M23, have been dating this girl, Emma, F22, for about a year now. She's sweet, intelligent, and super kind. But, like most relationships, things aren't always perfect, and we've had our share of minor miscommunications, disagreements, and the occasional awkward situation. However, nothing could have prepared me for the train wreck that was this past weekend. It all started when Emma and I decided to head up to her family's cabin for the weekend. Her family is great, but I had only met them a couple of times before. The plan was simple: get some fresh air, relax, and spend some quality time together. I thought it was going to be a nice, chill weekend in the woods. Nothing could go wrong, right? Well, I was wrong. Friday evening, we get there, unpack, and start to settle in. Her family is already there, and they're all incredibly welcoming, as usual. We have dinner together, talk about all sorts of random things, and then sit by the fire pit outside. It was the perfect, cozy start to the weekend. Now, here's the part where I made my mistake. Emma's dad, Bill, is a bit of a character. He's one of those guys who likes to joke around a lot, often in the form of dry humor and sarcastic remarks. He's got this rugged, outdoorsy vibe, and his sense of humor can sometimes come off as a little offbeat. So, we're sitting around the fire, and Emma's dad starts asking me about my plans for the future. Naturally, I talk about my job, my ambitions, and what I hope to achieve in life. Then, out of nowhere, he asks me, "So, when are you planning on marrying my daughter?" I know he's joking. I can tell by the grin on his face, but I also know this is his way of subtly testing me. So, trying to keep the vibe light and playful, I respond with, "Well, Bill, you know, I'm still thinking about it. Maybe I'll surprise you one of these days." Emma, who has been sitting beside me, gives me this look, like a mixture of confusion and concern. But I brush it off, thinking it's no big deal. I wasn't exactly lying, but I wasn't entirely serious either. After all, it's a joke, right? I'd never even thought about proposing yet, let alone making any formal plans, but I assumed it was all in good fun. The next day, Saturday, Emma and I decided to go hiking. It's one of her favorite activities, and I'm not really an outdoorsy guy, but I figured I'd give it a shot. We spend the morning trekking through the woods, talking about life, laughing, and just enjoying the quiet. When we get back to the cabin, Emma's mom, Susan, suggests we all go out for lunch at a nearby town. Everything's going smoothly until we get to the restaurant. We're seated at a big table, and as we're looking over the menu, Emma's mom leans over and says, "So, have you and Bill talked about wedding plans yet?" I freeze. My brain goes into full panic mode. Wedding plans? I say, trying to play it cool. What wedding plans? Susan just smiles knowingly. You know, the wedding. Bill mentioned something about you two possibly getting engaged soon. At this point, my heart starts pounding. I can't even remember what I said after that. I think I stammered something about how we hadn't really discussed it and that it wasn't something we were planning on right now. But I could feel the weight of the situation settling in. Emma's mom was definitely expecting more, and I could tell she wasn't buying my half-hearted response. We finish the meal in a bit of an awkward silence, and as we leave, Emma pulls me aside. "Okay, what the hell was that about?" she asks, looking visibly frustrated. I try to explain that I didn't mean to cause any confusion. I thought her dad was just joking around the night before, but it seems like they were all taking it way more seriously than I had anticipated. Emma doesn't seem convinced. She's genuinely upset, and honestly, I get why. It's clear to her that her parents are expecting some sort of commitment from me that I wasn't ready to give. And now I've inadvertently made things weird between us and her entire family. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Emma and I ended up having a long conversation. She was hurt. She told me that she had always imagined her first serious relationship would lead to marriage eventually, and that when I joked about it, it made her question where we stood as a couple. She didn't think I was being serious about our future together, and she felt like I was dragging my feet. I tried to reassure her that I loved her and I wanted a future together, but I wasn't quite ready to take that next step. However, I think my earlier comments had already put doubts in her mind. At this point, I'm absolutely panicking. I don't want to lose her over something this stupid, but I also don't want to rush into anything I'm not ready for. I tell her that I'll talk to her parents the next day to clear up the misunderstanding, but she's not so sure. She's torn between being upset with me for joking about marriage when it's clearly something she wants, and not knowing if she can trust me to make those big decisions when the time comes. The next morning, I decide to try to salvage the weekend by having a conversation with Bill and Susan. I take them aside and try to explain that I wasn't serious about the whole marriage comment, just trying to keep things lighthearted and not make things awkward. They seem to understand, but then Bill starts to give me this look, almost like he's sizing me up. "You know," Bill says, "we like you, kid. But we want to see some real commitment soon. You're a good guy, but don't keep dragging your feet." I can't help but feel like I'm getting a subtle warning. At the same time, Susan starts giving me this look that says, "You better not screw this up." Honestly, I think they were just trying to be supportive of their daughter, but it made me feel like I was being cornered. I end up spending the rest of the weekend in a fog. Emma and I barely speak, and when we do, it's only about surface-level things. I can feel the tension growing between us. By the time we leave the cabin on Sunday, it's clear that things are strained. Fast forward a few days. Emma and I have been texting, trying to patch things up, but it's clear that my little joke had larger consequences than I had expected. I know I need to have a serious conversation with her about where we stand, but right now, I'm just trying to figure out how to get through the next couple of days without making things worse. Moral of the story: don't joke about marriage with your girlfriend's parents unless you're 100% sure you know what they're expecting. And don't assume that everything is just a joke when it comes to serious commitments, because it might not be. I really hope I can fix this, but damn, I never thought a joke about marriage would turn my entire relationship upside down. TIFU by accidentally setting my apartment on fire after trying to make a romantic dinner for my girlfriend. So, a little background, my girlfriend, Sarah, and I have been dating for about 2 years. We've had a pretty easygoing relationship, no major drama, just lots of laughs, some weekend trips, and, the usual stuff that couples do. Lately, I've been feeling like I need to do something extra special for her. I wanted to show her that I can be thoughtful and romantic in a way that would make her fall even more in love with me. For months, she's been talking about how much she loves the idea of a fancy, home-cooked dinner. We both have pretty busy schedules, so eating out has been the go-to for most of our dates. But after hearing her gush about how much she loves the idea of a meal cooked with love, I decided that this would be my grand gesture. I would make the perfect romantic dinner, in my apartment, just for the two of us. The idea sounded great in theory, and I thought, how hard can it be? I'm no chef, but I figured I could at least follow a recipe. I even went so far as to watch a few YouTube tutorials, get all the right ingredients, and make sure my place looked nice, candles, flowers, soft music, all that classic romantic stuff. I was ready to be the hero of the evening. I chose a fancy 3-course meal, a stuffed chicken breast with garlic mashed potatoes, roasted vegetables, and a side of salad. For dessert, I planned on making chocolate lava cakes. I was going to knock her socks off. The day of the dinner, I was feeling pretty confident. I picked up the groceries in the morning, double-checked the recipes, and set up everything in the kitchen. I even made sure I'd have enough time to cook, clean, and set the table before she arrived. I started off by preparing the chicken, carefully seasoning it, stuffing it with cheese and herbs, and then searing it in the pan. I was on track, everything was going smoothly, and I was feeling like a pro. Then I made the fatal mistake. The next step involved putting the chicken in the oven to bake, and that's when things started to go south. I had a new oven, one of those fancy smart ones with all these buttons and settings that I hadn't fully gotten the hang of. I thought I set the temperature correctly, but clearly, I did not. I set the oven to 400 degrees Fahrenheit, which I thought was fine, but I didn't account for the fact that my oven tends to run a little hotter than the dial suggests. So, as the chicken was baking, I got distracted. I started peeling and mashing the potatoes, and my attention was diverted for just a minute. Big mistake. I heard a strange smell in the air, but I brushed it off at first, thinking it was just the garlic and herbs getting aromatic. But soon, the smell started to intensify, and that's when I realized something was burning. I rushed to the oven and opened the door. At first, it didn't look so bad. The chicken had browned nicely, but then I noticed something horrifying. Smoke was pouring out of the oven. Not just a little, no, this was serious smoke. I immediately turned off the oven and tried to pull the chicken out, but the pan was so hot that I couldn't touch it. I grabbed an oven mitt, but it was too late. The smoke was so thick that I couldn't see anything. At this point, panic set in. I started running around like a madman, trying to open windows and doors to let the smoke out. I grabbed the fire extinguisher from under the sink, but I wasn't sure if I was using it right. There I was, spraying foam all over the kitchen, my head spinning, wondering how things had gone so wrong. Then, of course, the fire alarm went off. Loud, blaring, shrieking in my ears. My heart was pounding in my chest. In all my preparation, I had somehow failed to realize that the smoke detectors in my apartment were extremely sensitive, and now they were doing their job with full force. By this point, the kitchen was a disaster. I had managed to put out the fire, but the damage had already been done. The chicken was completely ruined, burnt to a crisp on the outside and barely cooked on the inside. The kitchen looked like a war zone, with foam everywhere and black soot on the walls. My carefully prepared dinner plans had gone up in literal smoke. To make matters worse, Sarah was on her way over, and she had no idea what was happening. I tried calling her to warn her, but of course, she didn't answer. I panicked and started throwing things into the trash, trying to salvage anything before she arrived. I wiped down counters and opened all the windows, hoping to air out the place before she saw the destruction. When she finally knocked on the door, I was standing there, sweating, with a sheepish smile on my face. I greeted her, trying to act normal, but I could see the concern in her eyes. "Hey, what's going on?" "It smells weird in here," she said, looking around at the smoke residue. I laughed nervously and tried to play it off. "Oh, just a little cooking adventure. Nothing to worry about." She didn't buy it. "What happened?" "It smells like something's burnt." I sighed and led her into the kitchen. "Well, I tried to make us a nice dinner, but things kind of got out of hand." Her eyes widened as she took in the damage. The oven was still a mess, the air smelled like charred chicken, and the kitchen was covered in a layer of foam. "Oh my God," she said, covering her mouth. "You didn't." "I did," I said, defeated. "I set the oven to the wrong temperature, and I got distracted, and well, here we are." At that point, she started laughing. Not just a chuckle, but a full-on belly laugh. It was like the tension broke, and she couldn't stop herself. I was mortified, but I couldn't help but laugh along. It was so ridiculous. After a few minutes of us laughing at my complete failure, we decided to salvage the evening. We ended up ordering takeout from our favorite restaurant, and while it wasn't the fancy, homemade dinner I had envisioned, it was still a great evening. We sat on the couch, ate our food, and talked about everything, just like we always do. In the end, my grand romantic gesture was an epic disaster. But Sarah told me that she appreciated the effort, and she promised not to hold it against me. I think the lesson here is that I'm better off sticking to simple dates. Maybe next time, I'll just get her a nice bottle of wine. Anyway, it's safe to say I'll be leaving the cooking to the professionals from now on. TLDR, tried to cook a fancy dinner for my girlfriend to impress her. Ended up setting my apartment on fire, ruining the meal, and making a huge mess. We ordered takeout and laughed it off. TIFU by accidentally sending a sexy text to my mom, and it completely destroyed my relationship with her. I never thought my life would spiral so quickly over one text message. I mean, I'm a 27-year-old adult with a decent career, and I like to think of myself as a responsible person. But when it came to texting, I was a little too carefree with my shortcuts and habits. That day, I learned the hard way that being careless with texting can have consequences that you can't take back. Let me take you back to where it all went wrong. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon. I had just finished a long day at work and was sitting on the couch at home, casually scrolling through my phone. I had been texting my girlfriend, who I've been seeing for about 6 months. We have a pretty decent relationship, and we're constantly sending each other playful, flirty texts throughout the day. It's one of those things where we're always joking around, sending memes, and sometimes talking about things that are, well, a bit too spicy. On this particular day, my girlfriend had sent me a message that was very suggestive. I'm not going to get into the details, but let's just say it was an invitation to get a little more intimate later that night. Naturally, I replied in kind, sending her a message that was equally flirtatious and bold. My phone vibrated with the usual buzz from her laughing at my response, and as I was waiting for her to text back, I casually glanced at a couple of other messages on my phone. One of them was from my mom. Now, this isn't unusual. I get texts from her all the time, asking about my day or reminding me of family events. But for some reason, my mind was a bit distracted. I wasn't paying close attention to the name at the top of the message when I went to reply. I'm one of those people who doesn't always check who I'm texting before I respond. Bad habit, I know. Anyway, I typed out a message without thinking much about it. The response was one of the cheeky messages I had just sent my girlfriend. It wasn't anything too explicit, but it was definitely sexual in nature. The worst part? I hit send before I even realized what I had done. And that's when the realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The message had gone to my mom. For a solid 5 seconds, I froze in complete panic. My heart raced, and I felt the sudden warmth of terror spreading across my chest. My mind raced through every possible scenario of how this could play out. Maybe I could pretend it was meant for someone else. Maybe I could play it off as a joke. But the reality was that my mom knew how to read a message, and she certainly knew I didn't usually talk like that to her. I immediately typed out an apology, trying to backpedal as quickly as possible. OMG, Mom. That was meant for my girlfriend, not you. I am so sorry. Please don't read that. I hit send, but I didn't feel any better. In fact, the sinking feeling in my stomach only got worse. My hands were shaking as I waited for her to respond. But the silence that followed was deafening. It wasn't long before my phone vibrated again, and I saw a notification from my mom. I hesitated before opening it, my stomach in knots. I finally tapped it, bracing for whatever was about to happen next. The message was short and to the point. What the hell, / my name? My breath caught in my throat. The fact that she didn't immediately tear into me made me feel like I had a small chance of salvaging this disaster. Maybe she was just shocked. Maybe she was taking the time to process what she had just read. I didn't know, but I wasn't ready for what was about to unfold. I responded, Mom, I am so sorry. That wasn't meant for you. Please don't be mad. I didn't mean it. A few minutes passed before she responded, and when I saw her next message, I couldn't believe what I was reading. I'm very disappointed in you. I didn't raise you like this. The words stung, harder than I expected. My heart sank even further as I realized just how much this mistake was affecting her. My mom and I had always been close, and I had never done anything that I thought would make her feel disappointed in me. We had always shared an open, honest relationship, and now, in a matter of seconds, I had shattered that trust. I tried to explain myself, but my mom wasn't hearing it. She didn't respond to my texts for hours, and by the time she did, I was a wreck. We need to talk, was all she said. That night, I couldn't even enjoy the date with my girlfriend because I was consumed by the mess I had created. Every time I looked at my phone, my heart skipped a beat, hoping my mom would send a text saying she had forgiven me or at least understood that it was a mistake. But nothing came. The next day, I tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. I left multiple voicemails, trying to explain what had happened and how sorry I was. It felt like every attempt just made things worse. When she finally picked up the phone later that afternoon, her tone was cold, distant, and full of disappointment. / my name, I'm really upset with you. I'm not sure what's going on in your life, but I don't need to be a part of this. I raised you with respect, and you've completely disregarded that. I tried to explain that it was an honest mistake, that I wasn't thinking clearly, but nothing I said seemed to reach her. It was like I had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Weeks passed, and our relationship remained strained. My mom didn't want to speak to me much, and whenever we did talk, it was always short and awkward. I tried to make amends, sending flowers, writing letters, even inviting her to dinner, but nothing seemed to break through her hurt. She didn't say it directly, but I could tell she couldn't stop thinking about the text. And that thought was eating me up inside. The guilt was overwhelming. Eventually, I realized that this wasn't just about the text, it was about something deeper. I had disrespected her trust in our relationship in a way that was hard to repair. It wasn't just a mistake I could apologize for and move on from. The damage had been done, and I couldn't undo the hurt I caused her. So, here I am, months later, still working through the consequences of my careless mistake. It's not just a funny story to laugh about anymore, it's a painful reminder of how a single moment of stupidity can alter the course of a relationship. My mom and I are slowly rebuilding our relationship, but things will never be the same. I've learned a hard lesson in being careful with my words and actions, especially when it comes to texting. Please, take my advice. Always double-check who you're texting, and never get too comfortable with shortcuts and habits that could cause you to accidentally send something that'll haunt you forever. Trust me, you don't want to make the same mistake I did. So, to my mom, if you ever read this, I'm still so sorry. I'll work hard every day to make it right, even if it takes a lifetime. Hey, friends! If you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. It all started innocently enough. I was visiting my old college town for the weekend, something I hadn't done in a while. I decided to go grab a coffee at my favorite cafe near campus. It was a chilly Saturday morning, and I needed the caffeine boost, so I figured why not. As I walked in, the smell of freshly ground beans and baked pastries filled the air, bringing back memories of late-night study sessions and caffeine-fueled procrastination. The cafe was pretty quiet, with only a couple of people working on their laptops and a few others chatting quietly. I walked up to the counter and ordered my usual, a medium Americano with a dash of almond milk. I was already mentally preparing myself for the slight bitterness that always came with my order, but it was exactly what I needed. After I paid, I waited by the counter for my drink, casually scrolling through my phone. That's when I saw her. She was sitting at one of the tables by the window, looking out at the rain while sipping her coffee. She had the kind of look that made me do a double take: soft, messy hair, an oversized sweater that made her look like she had just rolled out of bed but in the best way possible, and an aura of calmness that was almost magnetic. I couldn't help but notice her smile as she looked down at her phone. She looked like someone I would have known back in college, but I couldn't quite place her. I turned my attention back to my phone, trying to convince myself that I wasn't staring, but my curiosity got the best of me. What was it about her that seemed so familiar? Did I know her from somewhere? Was she a friend of a friend? I racked my brain, trying to come up with an explanation. Then, like some sort of sign, she looked up from her phone, our eyes met for a brief moment, and she smiled. It wasn't just a polite smile, it was the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. She held my gaze for just long enough to make me feel both flustered and intrigued. Naturally, my immediate reaction was to do what any self-respecting, socially awkward person would do. I looked away as quickly as possible and tried to make it seem like I hadn't just made eye contact with a stranger and possibly embarrassed myself in the process. But then, to my surprise, she stood up and walked toward me. My heart rate immediately picked up. Was she coming over to say something? Was she going to ask about my drink or make small talk about the weather? Either way, I felt completely unprepared for what was about to unfold. She stopped right in front of me, her eyes still holding that same warm, friendly look. "Hey," she said, her voice soft but confident. "I know this is going to sound weird, but I think I remember you from college. You look really familiar." I blinked, momentarily stunned. My mind raced. She thought she knew me? Did I know her? I didn't recognize her right away, but maybe she was one of those people you see around campus but never actually talk to. I quickly tried to recall any girls I might have had interactions with back then, but my brain was going blank. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to recover. "I don't mean to sound rude, but I don't think I remember you. I definitely went to college here, though." She smiled again, and I could have sworn the whole room got a little bit warmer. "It's okay. I was a little more behind the scenes. I was the lead TA for some of the engineering courses, so you might not have ever seen me outside of class. But we did have a few mutual friends. I'm Emily, by the way." The name hit me like a lightning bolt. Emily. She was one of the TAs that I had always heard people talk about but had never actually interacted with. I had never been in one of her classes, and she wasn't someone I'd ever thought much about in the past. But now that I knew her name, it made sense. That brief familiarity I had felt earlier, now it clicked. She was one of those people who quietly stood out because of how effortlessly cool and composed she always seemed. "Oh my God, Emily. Right, I do remember you now. You were always helping out with the labs, right?" I laughed nervously, hoping I didn't sound too dorky. Yeah, that was me, she said, smiling in that warm, slightly amused way. I was just thinking about how strange it is that we never really got to know each other considering how much time we probably spent in the same places. But here we are. We started chatting a little more. It turns out she had stayed in town after graduation to work at a tech company. I was living a few hours away now, and the whole interaction felt so surreal, like it was some sort of random, long-lost reunion. Time seemed to slip away as we talked, but eventually, I realized I had been holding my coffee cup for way too long and hadn't even taken a sip. So, what brings you back to campus today? She asked, clearly noticing my distracted expression. I froze, suddenly remembering that the only reason I was there in the first place was because I had a date with Destiny, or rather, a date with my best friend, John. He had been nagging me for weeks to come visit and hang out. He said it was about time we caught up, and he wanted to take me to this new bar that had opened up near the campus. It sounded like a good time, but right now, I was far more invested in the conversation with Emily than in seeing John. Actually, I'm just in town for the weekend. My friend John and I were planning to catch up later, I said, trying not to sound too disinterested. We're supposed to go to a bar near here, but I'm not in any rush. It's been nice just chatting with you. She smiled again, her eyes lighting up as she looked down at her watch. Well, I've got a little while before I have to meet someone for brunch, but you're welcome to join me. It's not a date or anything, she added quickly, her tone a little sheepish, but it'd be fun to catch up. We could sit down and chat more if you're free. The offer felt like something out of a dream. She wanted to hang out with me? I'd barely even noticed how the time had passed. I was definitely interested in getting to know her better, but my awkward, socially anxious brain immediately panicked. The first thing that came out of my mouth was, sure, I'd love to, but I don't want to intrude or make it weird, you know? She laughed, her voice warm and genuine. It won't be weird. You don't have to worry about that. We agreed to meet at the cafe in an hour, and I walked out of there feeling a little like I had just stepped out of some romantic comedy. Emily was smart, interesting, and beautiful, and I had somehow managed not to make a total fool of myself in front of her. When I met her again an hour later, we spent the afternoon talking and laughing like we were old friends. It was one of those rare moments where everything just felt easy, where all the small awkwardnesses you expect never materialize. I may have been expecting a casual conversation, but what I ended up with was one of the most fun afternoons I had had in a long time. TLDR, I met an old college TA at a cafe, didn't recognize her at first, and then ended up spending the afternoon with her, completely forgetting about my plans with my best friend. So, this happened a couple of weeks ago, and I still can't wrap my head around it. I'm a 27-year-old guy, and for the past year, I've been renting a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood. I have a pretty regular routine, work, gym, and sometimes a bit of gaming or Netflix. Nothing crazy, nothing too out of the ordinary. But that all changed one fateful Tuesday morning. It started like any other day. I woke up to my alarm at 7:30 a.m., groggily hit snooze once, and then dragged myself out of bed around 7:45 a.m. I wasn't late, but I was definitely running on caffeine and sheer willpower. I made some coffee, got dressed in my usual work attire, and rushed out the door. No big deal. I live on the second floor of my building, so it's just a quick walk down the hall and out the door to my car. As I stepped outside, I noticed something a bit off. There was a new car parked right outside the building. It was a black sedan, nothing fancy, but definitely out of place. I live in a relatively small building, only 8 units in total, so I know most of the cars that park around here. This one was unfamiliar. I didn't think too much of it, though, maybe a visitor or someone new moving in. Anyway, I drove to work, had my usual uneventful day, and came back home around 5:30 p.m. When I got back, the car was still there, and it was parked in a way that made it hard for me to park in my usual spot. Now, I've been living here for over a year, and I have a pretty specific spot I always park in. It's not assigned, but it's always available because, well, I'm the only one who really parks there regularly. So, when I saw this random car taking up the space, I felt a little annoyed. But I figured I'd just park in a different spot and leave it at that. I parked in a spot further down the row, walked up to my apartment, and didn't think too much of it. That night, as I was eating dinner in front of the TV, I heard a knock on the door. It was kind of late, around 8:30 p.m. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was immediately suspicious. I checked the peephole, and to my surprise, it was the person from the car. A man in his mid-30s, wearing a casual jacket and looking slightly nervous. I opened the door just a crack, enough to see him clearly, but not enough for him to barge in. "Hey, sorry to bother you, but I think you have my parking spot," he said, gesturing toward the space I'd parked in earlier. I was confused. "What are you talking about? The parking spots aren't assigned." "I've been parking there for the past week, and that's where I usually park," he said, looking a little uncomfortable. At this point, I realized I had no idea who this guy was. I mean, I had seen him around the building a couple of times, but I never really interacted with him. I'd definitely never seen him in my parking spot before, though. I wasn't about to back down, so I decided to be polite but firm. "Look, man, I've been parking there for over a year. It's not an assigned spot, and if you want to park there, you'll have to fight me for it." He laughed nervously, and then, after a long pause, said, "Look, I don't want any trouble. I just thought I'd let you know. I'm not trying to cause a scene." I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded and closed the door. But this interaction was bothering me. I didn't want any drama with the neighbors, especially over something as trivial as a parking spot. So I made a mental note to just keep parking where I always do and hoped this would blow over. The next day, things got even weirder. I left for work in the morning as usual, but when I came back that afternoon, the black sedan was parked in front of my spot again. I didn't think much of it at first, but as I walked to my apartment, I saw that the guy was standing by the car, looking at me. He was holding a piece of paper, and as soon as he saw me approaching, he waved it in the air. "Hey. I left you a note," he called out, a little too cheerfully for my liking. I stopped in my tracks. "A note? What for?" "It's just to remind you about the parking thing," he said, walking over to me with a slightly awkward smile. He handed me the paper, and as I read it, I immediately felt uncomfortable. The note was clearly written in a hurried hand, and it said, "Please don't park in my spot again. I'm just trying to be nice, but this is my space, and I'd really appreciate it if you respected that. Thanks, John." Now, I was officially creeped out. It wasn't even a request, it was an order. I didn't know this guy well enough for him to make demands of me, and I certainly wasn't going to just roll over because of a note he left me. But I tried to stay calm. I didn't want to escalate things, especially since I didn't even know what his deal was. "Listen," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "I've been parking here for over a year, and I don't know what this is about, but I'm not going to start moving my car just because you're telling me to. This is not an assigned spot, and I'm not going to deal with this again." He seemed to deflate a little bit but didn't back down. "Well, I guess we'll see who wins, won't we?" I didn't want to deal with it anymore, so I just walked away and went inside. The next day, things took a real turn. When I went outside, my car had been keyed. Deep scratches ran along the side, and it looked like someone had intentionally damaged it. I was furious. The only person I could think of who would do something like that was the guy with the sedan. No one else in the building seemed to have any motive, and I had a sinking feeling in my gut. I immediately took pictures and reported the damage to my insurance company. The next day, I went down to talk to the building manager. I wasn't sure what he could do, but I figured I had to tell someone. It turned out, I wasn't the only one who had problems with this guy. A couple of other neighbors had complained about him being overly territorial, and one had even mentioned that he had claimed a parking spot as his own. The manager wasn't thrilled about the situation but said he'd talk to the guy and try to sort things out. A few days later, the manager called me back. Apparently, John had admitted to scratching my car. He said it was just a misunderstanding, but the damage was already done. The manager gave him a warning and told him he would have to pay for the repairs. I didn't expect much to come from that, but at least something was being done. To make a long story short, the guy ended up leaving the building a few weeks later. I never found out why, but I guess my parking spot wasn't worth fighting over after all. The whole situation left me feeling uneasy for a while, but it did teach me one thing: never underestimate the power of an oddly territorial neighbor. Anyway, lesson learned: don't mess with someone's parking spot, or you might just end up in a battle you can't win. TIFU by accidentally sending my entire office a video of me trying to practice seductive faces in the mirror. So I, 29M, work at a fairly typical mid-sized marketing firm where everyone tries to act more professional than they actually are. It's an open floor plan, lots of fake plants, and a Slack channel called #MondayMotivation that no one uses except Karen from HR and sometimes our CEO when he posts inspirational quotes over JPEGs of mountain ranges. Anyway, last week, my girlfriend made a joke about how I can't do a sexy face to save my life. She said I always look like I'm either trying to pass a kidney stone or just remembered I left the oven on. I took this as a personal challenge. So I spent a couple nights practicing in the mirror, trying to master the elusive smolder. I watched tutorials on YouTube. I tried to channel my inner Ryan Gosling. I experimented with lighting, angles, and facial tension. I even whispered nonsense like blue steel to get into character. I decided the only way to know if I was making progress was to record myself. So I did. On Saturday night, I set up my phone in the bathroom, shirt off, because, authenticity, dimmed the lights, and hit record. For a full 5 minutes, I ran through various attempts at seductive expressions. I winked. I bit my lip. I ran my hand through my hair. I said, "Hey, you," in what I thought was a smooth baritone but probably sounded more like a sleep-deprived Muppet. At one point, I even did that slow eyebrow raise thing like The Rock, except my left eyebrow doesn't work properly, so it looked like I was having a mild stroke. Needless to say, it was horrific, but I was proud. It was the kind of cringe that could only come from true commitment. I labeled the video Seductive Practice 3.mp4, yes, there were earlier versions, and I meant to send it to my girlfriend for a laugh. I thought she'd get a kick out of how seriously I took her offhand comment. Except, I didn't send it to her. On Monday morning, we were finalizing a campaign for one of our clients, a trendy dating app. As the lead copywriter, I was tasked with coming up with ideas for their Valentine's campaign, and we'd all agreed to compile some concepts and send them to a shared drive that the entire team, around 40 people, had access to. The drives folder was titled client_pitch_February. We were supposed to drop in our decks, drafts, and any multimedia assets that might inspire our creative direction. I was in a rush. I had my phone in one hand, half a banana in the other, and was frantically uploading files from both my laptop and phone while running late for the morning stand-up meeting. I clicked on what I thought was the folder of visual references I had saved from the dating app's branding materials. Without realizing it, I dropped Seductive Practice 3.mp4 right into the client_pitch_February folder. Then I left for the meeting. The meeting started off normally, lots of jargon, people pretending to take notes. Then my boss, Amanda, said, "Let's take a look at some of the visual assets you all uploaded. Some great work in there already." She connects her laptop to the screen in the conference room and opens the folder. And there it is. Seductive Practice 3.mp4. The entire room goes silent. There's a beat of confusion. Then Amanda, thinking it might be some edgy video ad one of us whipped up for the dating app, clicks on it. Now imagine, a large TV in a glass-walled conference room, surrounded by professionals, early Monday morning. Lights dimmed slightly for better viewing. And then suddenly, *me*, shirtless, biting my lip like a constipated TikTok star, staring deeply into my own reflection, whispering "you like that" to absolutely no one. It played for approximately 14 seconds before someone, thankfully, had the presence of mind to slam Amanda's laptop shut. But the damage was done. There was a pause. Then an awkward cough. Then someone, I think Tyler from UX, muttered, "Bold direction." I turned a color I didn't even know my body could produce. Not red. Not purple. Like blood orange. I wanted to evaporate. Just disintegrate like a cursed NPC in a Bethesda game. Amanda, who thankfully has a sense of humor, just slowly turned to me and said, "Was that part of the pitch?" I stammered something about alternative engagement strategy and emotional resonance. I don't even know what I was saying. My ears were ringing. I was sweating so much my smartwatch thought I was working out. After the meeting, people tried to be nice. They said things like, "Hey, at least you're comfortable in your own skin, and you've got some real screen presence." But Slack was not kind. A screenshot of me mid-smolder, mouth half open, eyes glazed over like a haunted Victorian child, was turned into a meme within the hour. The caption was, "When the client says, make it sexier." My girlfriend, of course, thought it was hilarious and now refers to me exclusively as Mr. Smolder. My friends haven't stopped sending me Photoshop edits of my face on romance novel covers. I've become an unwilling legend in our office lore. And now every time someone opens a meeting with "let's look at some visuals," I have to resist the urge to flee the building. So yeah. That's how I seduced my entire company. Accidentally. TIFU, by pretending to be fluent in German to impress my girlfriend's parents. So this actually started about 2 months ago. But the full extent of my F \****** up only reached its final form last weekend, and I still haven't fully recovered from the social shrapnel. I, 26M, have been dating my girlfriend Lena, 25F, for about 8 months. Things are going great. She's funny, beautiful, smart, and most importantly, she tolerates how I eat pizza crust first. Anyway, Lena is originally from Germany, though she's been living in the US since she was in high school. She's fluent in both German and English, and has always occasionally peppered our conversations with German phrases. I found it super cute, and I figured that maybe if I learned some basics, I could impress her. Here's where the story starts going sideways. Back in March, we were having brunch with some of her friends, and one of them, Clara, starts speaking German to Lena across the table. Lena replies in German, and everyone laughs. I didn't catch a word of it, but I really wanted to be part of the moment, so I did what any rational person does when they feel left out. I pretended. I laughed along and said, in what I imagined sounded convincingly European, "Ja, sehr lustig." Everyone turned to look at me. Clara raised her eyebrows and asked something else in German. I nodded. Naderlich. Lena blinked and asked, "Du sprichst Deutsch?" In a decision that now echoes in my brain like a death knell, I said, "A little." This was mistake number 1. Over the next few weeks, Lena seemed thrilled that I was learning German. She'd text me simple phrases like "Guten Morgen," main shots, and I'd run to Google Translate to figure out a reply. I downloaded Duolingo and did the bare minimum to keep the lie going. I even changed the voice on my phone's GPS to German for immersion, which mostly resulted in me missing highway exits. Then Lena dropped the bomb. Her parents were flying in from Hamburg to visit her and meet me. They spoke English okay, but she said it would mean a lot to them if I spoke a little German. My internal monologue at this point sounded something like, "This is fine. You'll say some phrases. Smile. Nod. Don't get cocky." That was mistake number 2. The day finally arrives. I show up to Lena's apartment and there they are, her and Frau Newman, looking like they just stepped off the set of a German crime drama, very serious, very well dressed, very German. I greet them with a cheerful Guten Tag, and immediately see their faces light up. Encouraged, I go for a Hail Mary, "Es ist schön, Sie zu treffen," which I had practiced 40 times in front of a mirror. Success. Lena beams at me like I'd just recited a sonnet. We all sit down to lunch. At first, it's going okay. Her parents speak slowly in English. I throw in the occasional danky or bit and lean heavily on enthusiastic nodding. But then Mr. Newman, who has the same energy as a Bond villain but in a polite, buttoned-up way, starts speaking to me directly. In German. I freeze. I panic. I smile like a golden retriever trying to do algebra and reply, Ja, das ist gut. Mr. Newman raises an eyebrow but continues. I pick out one word, fish. I remember that one. Fish. Okay. So I say, ich liebe Fisch. Lena looks confused. Her mom looks horrified. Mistake number 3. Apparently what he actually asked was whether I keep kosher, because they had brought fresh seafood and didn't want to offend me. What I said basically translated to I love fish, with the enthusiasm of a toddler yelling about dinosaurs. Now it gets worse. Lena's mom, trying to be friendly, asks me something that I interpret as how do you like the weather, because I heard wetter. I enthusiastically say, das Wetter ist sehr sexy. Because in my panic, I confused heiß, hot, with sexy, which I learned from Duolingo during a lesson on compliments that was definitely not about meteorology. There's an awkward silence. Lena starts laughing nervously. Her mom mutters something that includes the word schand, which I later learned means shame. Mr. Newman sips his wine like he's reconsidering every life decision that led him to this table. I try to recover by offering to help set the table. I stand up too fast, knock over my chair, and bump the table hard enough to spill Lena's dad's wine onto his lap. In my flustered state, I yell, Ich bin ein Wasserfall. Which I meant as I'm sorry, but translated to I am a waterfall. Silence again. Lena looks like she wants to sink into the floor. Her mom dabs at her husband's trousers with a napkin. I consider jumping out the window. Later, Lena pulls me aside and asks, why did you tell me you spoke German? And I, a man now running solely on shame and adrenaline, said, I didn't think it would go this far. Her parents were kind enough not to bring it up again, and Lena and I have laughed about it since, but the damage is eternal. I am now permanently labeled in her family as the waterfall guy. Every time I try to redeem myself, someone brings up the sexy weather incident. Lena even bought me a t-shirt with a fish on it that says Ich liebe Fisch. I've since committed to actually learning German, but the bar is so low now that when I manage to say Guten Morgen correctly, her dad acts like I split an atom. So yeah. Today I ******* up by pretending to be fluent in German, and now I'm a sexy weather-loving waterfall fish guy in the eyes of the people whose approval I wanted most. TIFU by trying to surprise my girlfriend with a romantic scavenger hunt and almost getting arrested for kidnapping, so this happened last weekend and I'm still trying to piece together how many laws I accidentally broke in the name of romance. For context, my girlfriend, let's call her Sarah, is obsessed with rom-coms. Like full-blown, can quote 10 things I hate about you line for line, ******* love actually * kind of obsessed. For our 1-year anniversary, I thought it'd be sweet and memorable to create a rom-com style surprise scavenger hunt across the city that would end with me proposing a weekend getaway. That's the dream. The reality was a little more FBI watch list. Step 1 was simple enough. I arranged for her best friend, Jess, to deliver a cheesy poem and the first clue to her apartment door. She was thrilled, giddy, and immediately bought into the whole thing. The poem sent her to the cafe where we had our first date. There, I had bribed one of the baristas to hand her a latte with another clue taped under the cup. That one pointed her to the bookstore we always get lost in. So far, so good. This is where things start to slide off the rails. Clue 3 was hidden inside a library book. Specifically, inside a copy of Pride and Prejudice I had placed on a random shelf at our local library. I thought this would be peak Mr. Darcy vibes. What I didn't count on was someone else finding the book before her. Some confused stranger picked it up, saw a handwritten love note, and assumed it was a real lost love letter. They turned it in to the front desk, who in turn thought it might be part of a harassment situation. Seriously, who writes notes like "you are the only plot twist I want" and hides them in public books? Me, apparently. By the time Sarah showed up asking about a note in Pride and Prejudice, the librarian had already flagged it and called campus security. They let her take it, but not before noting her name and asking her a bunch of questions. She called me, a little weirded out but laughing it off. I told her it was all part of the plan and not to worry. Mistake number 1. The next clue sent her to a park where I had arranged for a violinist to play our song, "Don't Ask, It's Africa" by Toto, "Don't Judge Us." I was supposed to be hiding behind a bench, ready to hand her the next note and a rose. Except the violinist bailed last minute due to a family emergency. So I scrambled to find a backup on TaskRabbit. The guy I hired, let's call him Carl, showed up wearing a fedora, sunglasses, and a trench coat because he thought it'd be theatrical. I can't stress this enough. Do not send a man dressed like a budget spy to loiter around a children's park playing 80s rock ballads on a violin. Parents freaked. One woman actually screamed. I tried to run out and de-escalate, but somehow, someone thought I was with Trenchcoat Carl in some sort of child luring scheme. Cops were called. Again. When the officers arrived, Sarah was just getting there. She tried to explain, but by then I was already being patted down and Carl was trying to explain that this was all a romantic gesture while he still had the bow in his hand. Luckily, the cops were pretty understanding once we showed them the clues and texts and the ridiculous poem trail. They let us go, but not before giving me a verbal warning and suggesting I avoid public performance art involving disguises and strangers in parks. Point taken. By now Sarah was laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. Not romantic tears. The kind you cry when your boyfriend almost gets placed on a watch list. I tried to salvage the day by moving on to the final stage of the hunt, a hotel room decked out in candles, rose petals, and a handwritten love letter. Jess had the key and was supposed to set it up while we were out. Only Jess had forgotten the room number and called the front desk pretending to be me. When they wouldn't give it to her, she tried to figure it out by knocking on several doors looking for her friend's surprise setup. Guess who got escorted out of the building? By the time we made it to the hotel, security wouldn't let me in without calling the manager. I had to show ID, confirm the credit card, and explain that no, I wasn't planning a bachelor party but just trying to impress my girlfriend with some flower petals and bad poetry. Finally, we made it into the room. It actually looked great. Candles were lit, thankfully none had fallen over, music was playing, and the rose petals spelled out "Let's escape together." I handed her the last note, a printout of flight tickets for a weekend trip to the mountains. She stared at it for a long time, then just started laughing again. Like deep, belly-aching laughter. She said it was the most chaotic, ridiculous, utterly stressful date she'd ever had, and somehow still the most thoughtful. So yes, I nearly got arrested twice, accidentally alarmed a public library, traumatized some kids, and possibly got banned from a Marriott, but in the end, she kissed me, said yes to the trip, and called it the most perfectly imperfect anniversary ever. Would I do it again? No. Never. Absolutely not. Did I learn anything? Yes. Next year, I'm just getting her flowers and brunch. TIFU by accidentally triggering a company-wide panic over a fake cybersecurity breach I made up to avoid a meeting. So this happened last month, but I'm still dealing with the fallout. I work in IT at a medium-sized tech company. I'm not going to name names, but think open floor plans, beanbags, and those terrible coffee machines that somehow cost more than actual baristas. I've been here for almost 3 years and mostly like my job, but like many corporate drones, I absolutely loathe one specific weekly meeting. Let's call it Data Review Wednesday. It's basically an hour of people pretending they looked at dashboards while throwing jargon around to justify existing. I'd gotten into the habit of coincidentally having some minor technical issue that needed my urgent attention right before that meeting. Usually it was a vague network irregularity or user access conflict that no one really understood but sounded important enough to excuse my absence. It worked like a charm for almost a year. Until last month. On that particular Wednesday, I overslept. I'm talking 11:43 a.m. wake up to a Slack message from my manager asking all good for DRW in the meeting chat. Panic. I threw on a hoodie, bolted to my laptop, and tried to think of something fast. In a moment of extreme poor judgment, I typed, "Hey everyone, I think we've got a breach. Getting alerts from Sentinel-1 and weird logins from overseas IPs. Need to look into this ASAP." The words were barely out before I realized the gravity of what I'd done. My inbox lit up like a Christmas tree. Our CISO pinged me within 30 seconds. The CTO, who I'd spoken to maybe twice in my life, suddenly appeared in our Slack war room demanding logs and a timeline. Legal was CC'd on everything. I was asked if data had been exfiltrated. The SOC team went full DEFCON mode. At this point, I had two choices. Come clean immediately and say I made it up to skip a meeting, or make it real. I chose chaos. I grabbed some random logs from a sandboxed VM and highlighted a few failed login attempts from an IP block in Germany. Possible credential stuffing, I wrote. Investigating. The lie kept snowballing. I looped in a junior analyst and told him to pull packet captures from our East Coast office. He didn't even question me, just nodded like a soldier going to war. The next 6 hours were a blur. People canceled external meetings. An exec who was on vacation in Hawaii joined a Zoom call at 3 a.m. local time. Our cloud infrastructure partner reached out asking if we were under attack. I watched in horror as I became the eye of a very real corporate storm. At some point during the frenzy, someone triggered a company-wide forced password reset, locking out around 80% of the staff for a good 20 minutes, including the CEO, who was mid-presentation for investors. That was probably the lowest point. Around 5 p.m., our lead incident response guy announced that there was no conclusive evidence of compromise. Everyone was exhausted. The meeting I was trying to skip was obviously long over, and I felt physically ill. My conscience gnawed at me the entire night. I barely slept. The next morning, I went to my boss and told her the truth. Well, a version of the truth. I said I had misread some test logs and panicked, thinking they were live data. I admitted to acting too quickly and not properly validating the threat before escalating. I apologized profusely and offered to write the postmortem and take whatever disciplinary action was coming. She stared at me for a long time, then said, "You know what? You actually did exactly what we trained for. False positives happen. It's better to act and be wrong than not act and let something slip." I nodded like a humble hero while dying inside. For the next week, I was quietly praised in meetings for my swift detection and decisive response. My name was brought up in a company-wide email commending the IT team. I received a Starbucks gift card from the CTO. People I'd never met before came to my desk and thanked me. Meanwhile, I kept waiting for someone to uncover the lie. No one did. Until 2 days ago. An intern, who had been working on documentation for incident response, came to me with a draft asking for clarification on the April 10th breach. He had pulled logs and compared them to our Splunk dashboards for training purposes and noticed there were no matching alerts anywhere. He was confused. He wasn't accusing me, just genuinely trying to understand how a breach could trigger no correlating data across our systems. I stared at him for a full 10 seconds. Then I told him to hold off on the report and that I'd get back to him. Now I'm sitting here, writing this, knowing that my house of cards is one inquisitive intern away from collapse. If he escalates this, I'm not just getting fired, I might get blacklisted from every major IT job for faking a breach. I've already started updating my resume and casually checking job boards, just in case. So yeah. I faked a cyber attack to avoid a meeting and accidentally caused a company-wide lockdown, lied to legal, and became the accidental hero of a fake emergency I created. And now an intern with a sharp eye and no concept of plausible deniability might be the end of me. Wish me luck. TIFU by taking edible gummies before meeting my girlfriend's ultra-conservative family for the first time. So this happened a few weeks ago, but the mental scars are fresh. I, 29M, have been dating my girlfriend, 27F, whom I'll call Claire, for about a year. She's amazing, smart, funny, kind, and somehow still finds me endearing despite my frequent idiocy. This story is proof of that idiocy. Claire comes from a deeply conservative family. I'm talking Sunday brunch after church conservative. They're not mean, just very proper. Her dad is a retired colonel. Her mom teaches etiquette to middle schoolers. They have a family crest. Seriously. Anyway, after a year of dating and countless FaceTime hellos, I'm finally invited to her parents' house for a weekend. Claire gives me a long list of do's and don'ts: no swearing, no politics, dress nicely, don't bring up that I'm agnostic, and under no circumstances mention my tattoo that says exist loudly. I'm nervous, but I want to make a good impression. Fast forward to the day of. I'm all packed and ready to go. Claire is picking me up after work for the 3-hour drive to her parents' house. It's been a stressful week. Work has been insane, my apartment flooded 2 days before, and I haven't had a good night's sleep in a week. I figure I'll just take the edge off with a little edible. Just a tiny gummy. Important context: I'm not a frequent user. I dabble. Once or twice a month, max. So even a small dose hits me hard. I pop a 5 mg THC gummy around 3:30, thinking, it'll mellow me out just enough to survive a weekend of small talk about stock portfolios and Rotary clubs. Claire picks me up at 4, and I'm feeling fine. Just a little floaty. We hit the road, chatting, music on low, everything is good. Then about 45 minutes in, something shifts. I start noticing patterns in the trees. The wind has a personality. My hands feel too big. I realize I'm very, very high. I'm quiet for a bit, trying to ride it out, when Claire notices and asks if I'm okay. I panic and blurt out, I think I might be melting. Not helpful. She pulls over because she thinks I'm having a panic attack. Which I kind of am, but also I'm just blitzed out of my mind. She figures it out quickly. She's mad, but trying not to lose it. You knew you were meeting my parents today and you thought this was a good idea? I apologize profusely and promise I'll sober up before we arrive. She drives the rest of the way in tense silence while I chug water and eat pretzels like they're magic antidotes. We get to her parents' house around 7. I'm not high anymore, I am now something worse, post-high. You know that anxious, wobbly, dead-eyed state where everything feels vaguely wrong and you're hyper-aware of your breathing? That. Claire gives me one last chance to back out. Do you want to stay in the car while I go in and explain? I should have said yes. God, I should have said yes. But in my fried little brain, I thought, no, I need to show them I'm serious. Be a man. Push through. Like I'm storming the beaches of Normandy or something. We go in. Her parents greet us warmly. I try to smile, but I'm 98% sure it comes off as manic. I go in for a handshake and accidentally grab her mom's wrist like I'm checking for a pulse. Her dad stares at me like I just handed him a vegan burger at a Texas barbecue. Dinner is already on the table. Roast beef, mashed potatoes, green beans. Classic. I sit down and do that thing where I try to make eye contact with everyone so they know I'm engaged. Except I think I'm overdoing it, because Claire kicks me under the table. Twice. Then the conversation starts. Her dad asks what I do for work. Easy enough. I launch into an overly detailed explanation of UX design, forgetting that nobody outside the tech industry actually cares about user flow optimization. I use the phrase interactive synergy unironically. Her mom nods like I'm speaking Elvish. Halfway through dinner, it gets worse. My stomach is doing somersaults. I try to discreetly excuse myself, but instead I say, loudly, I must evacuate. Like a robot. Then I stand up and walk straight into a coat rack. I spend the next 20 minutes in their bathroom, having what I can only describe as a gastrointestinal exorcism. My guts are staging a mutiny. At some point I knock over a scented candle and it shatters in the sink. I panic and try to clean it up, but I cut my hand and now there's blood. I wrap it in toilet paper and leave the bathroom looking like I just escaped a horror movie. Claire is waiting in the hallway, murder in her eyes. Her dad is now watching Fox News in the living room and pretending I don't exist. Her mom is scrubbing the bathroom like she's trying to erase my DNA. We sleep in separate guest rooms that night. I stare at the ceiling for hours, contemplating my life choices. The next morning, Claire's mom serves me oatmeal and chamomile tea, the international meal of disappointment. No one makes eye contact. I try to apologize again, but it comes out as a sad mumble about edibles and fiber. We cut the weekend short. Claire drives us home in silence. At one point, she says, I need time to think. My stomach sinks. I think it's over. I completely blew it. But, miraculously, she calls me the next day. She says it was the worst first impression anyone has ever made, but she knows I was trying. She says her parents think I'm troubled but polite, which I'll take as a win. We're still together, but I'm on a strict no-weed policy before any future family events. So yeah. I learned a few things: never take edibles before high-stakes social interactions, always test your tolerance beforehand, and if you ever feel the urge to push through while high, don't. Just don't. TIFU by trying to impress my coworkers with homemade hot sauce and sending 3 people to the hospital. So this happened a couple of months ago, but the aftermath is still haunting me. I work in a mid-sized tech firm where most people are your standard computer geeks, quiet, into fantasy novels, allergic to gym memberships, and prone to very passionate opinions about hot sauces. Seriously, there's an ongoing, unofficial competition in our office where people bring in hot sauces for others to try. One guy brought in a bottle from this obscure brand called Satan's Sweat that made a dude in QA cry in the bathroom. Another guy soaked Carolina Reapers in vodka and dared people to take shots. It's a weird subculture in our otherwise dull office life. Enter me, 26M, overconfident and heavily influenced by YouTube hot sauce making channels. I figured, why not throw my hat into the ring and make a sauce that would obliterate everyone else's attempts? I wanted it to be flavorful but vicious. I wanted it to earn whispered nicknames. I wanted to be the sauce guy. So I spent a weekend crafting what I called Nuclear Option. The base was a mix of roasted garlic, mango, and lime, but then I added 3 types of chilies, ghost peppers, Carolina Reapers, and something called a dragon's breath chili that I got from an online store run by a dude who grows them in his basement and ships them in biohazard labeled packages. I wore gloves and goggles while making the sauce. I blended it into a thick red-orange liquid and poured it into a glass bottle with a skull sticker I got from a Halloween store. I tasted the tiniest drop on the tip of a toothpick and felt like I was getting stabbed in the tongue by a radioactive bee, but I figured that was the point. I wanted it painful. Fast forward to Monday. I bring Nuclear Option to work. People are immediately intrigued. A few folks huddle around, reading the warning label I jokingly wrote, consume at your own risk. Not liable for hallucinations, spiritual awakenings, or explosive bowel trauma. Everyone laughs. I leave it in the kitchen next to the communal coffee pot and head to my desk. Around noon, I hear a commotion from the kitchen. Someone's coughing like they're dying. Another person is yelling, "Why would you do this?" I rush over and see Tom from sales, red in the face, tears streaming down, clutching the countertop for dear life. There's a half-eaten chicken tender next to him. Apparently, he slathered it in my sauce like it was ketchup. Tom ends up vomiting in the break room trash can while another coworker fans him with a quarterly report. Someone else, Claire from HR, is trying to drink water straight from the tap while her eyes water uncontrollably. A third guy, Alan from finance, starts hyperventilating and muttering about his throat closing up. At this point, I'm starting to panic. Someone calls building security, who then calls 911 because Alan has a legitimate pepper allergy. He never told anyone this, and now his face is swelling up like a balloon animal. Paramedics show up, take one look at the bottle, and immediately glove up before even touching it. 3 people are taken to the hospital. Tom has chemical burns on the inside of his mouth. Claire gets in 4 because she dehydrated herself trying to flush the heat out with water. Alan spends 2 nights in the ICU and now has to carry an EpiPen at all times. I am sitting in the office kitchen, holding the glass bottle of nuclear option like it's a murder weapon, while the remaining staff stare at me like I'm the Unabomber. HR has a field day. I get pulled into a meeting with my manager and a guy from corporate compliance who looks like he hasn't laughed in 20 years. I'm told that while my enthusiasm for workplace bonding is noted, I unintentionally created a toxic workplace hazard. I avoid being fired by the skin of my teeth and a formal written apology to the entire office. For the next few weeks, people call me Spicy Ted Bundy behind my back. Someone leaves a fire extinguisher on my desk with a note saying, "For your next culinary experiment." The bottle of sauce gets locked in a janitor closet, but not before someone takes a picture of it and makes it into a meme that circulates internally. The worst part? I genuinely liked the sauce. I had spent hours perfecting the flavor, and now it's banned. I can't even bring it home because my roommate threatened to move out if it enters the apartment again. Now I'm the guy who accidentally biochemically assaulted half the office. Potlucks have been cancelled indefinitely. Someone else tried to bring in cookies 2 weeks later, and no one touched them because everyone thought they might be spicy. I still work there. I still eat lunch alone. Moral of the story: don't try to impress your coworkers with artisanal napalm. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.